In this video, I will show you how to install Android Studio latest Canary version on Mac OS. I'm using Mac OS Catalina, and the instructions should be similar for other versions of Mac OS as well. So, I go to my web browser as the first step, and then head over to developer.android.com/studio/preview. Here you will find the link to the latest Canary version or preview version of Android Studio. By default, it will show you the installer for Mac. Download Arctic Fox Canary 8. But in order to see, and if you like to see more downloads for Android Studio and all available options, you can select more downloads, and then there's an agreement to agree to, after which you will be shown all the available versions. For the latest version, Android Studio Canary 8, we have Windows and Chrome OS installers and then zip files. Under zip files, we have a Mac version that is specific to our Mac system, and this is the version that we will need to download and install for Mac. I have already clicked and downloaded this file, so I have it in my downloads directory. Let's go and check it out. I go to my downloads folder, and here, this is the archive file for Mac. I open it, wait for the archive to be expanded or extracted. Okay, actually installing Android Studio on Mac operating system is probably the easiest way of installing Android Studio on different operating systems. All you need to do is to grab this file, Android Studio file that has the app extension, and drag it to the applications folder. So I drag it to the applications folder. I already have a version of Android Studio Preview that is almost up to date, but not completely up to date, so I decide to replace it with this version. Alright, now Android Studio is installed and ready to use. But if it's the first time that you are installing that, you need to do the setup for Android SDK. And I'm gonna show you what you need to do. Let me minimize the browser. And then from the list of applications, you'll have access to Android Studio. You open it. First, it verifies the application and then it starts it. There's a warning whether to open the file or not to trust it. I trust the file, so I open it. Android Studio is launching. Okay, we have Android Studio here. But, as I said before, if it's the first time that you are installing Android Studio, it will ask you to specify the location for SDK and also the options to install for the SDK. At least you will need to select Android SDK and a latest version of the platform. You will be shown two options for installing SDK: custom and standard. I recommend going with the standard option that is already selected, which will install Android SDK aligned with Android platform tools and also a latest version of Android API aligned with Android emulator, and you will be good to go. In case you didn't set up Android SDK settings when you are launching Android Studio for the first time, you also have the option to go to the settings of Android Studio and do the SDK settings from there. For example, I can go to the settings from the Customize tab in this version of Android Studio, and then All Settings. And here we have Android SDK under System Settings, which is in turn under Appearance and Behavior. And here there's an option, Android SDK Location, which you specify as the location where the SDK components will be downloaded and saved to. I have these components already installed. For example, I have under SDK platforms Android 8 to Android 11 installed. And also under SDK tools, I have these components installed. Some of them need update that show a minus in front of them. In order to update, I can simply click them, check them, and it will be updated to the latest version. CMake, Android SDK, command line tools, and NDK. This will make a lot of time to complete, so I'm gonna uncheck or cancel these selections for now. But for now, just remember that these are the options that I have installed, but some of them are optional in order to use Android Studio. For example, NDK, you will not need NDK most of the time unless you are doing some native development. And also LLDB or CMake. But most of the time you will need build tools, command line tools, Android emulator and SDK platform tools, and also Android SDK tools, as well as Google Play Services and Emulator Accelerator or HackSem installer. And from the SDK platforms, you don't need to install a lot of these. You can simply go with the latest one like Android 11, and also if you select show package details, you can select an image, a system image for that version of Android that allows you to have a virtual device, to create a virtual device with that version of Android running on it. So that's it for an explanation of different components of SDK if you want to manually install them. But for ease of use, if it's your first time, I recommend that you go with the standard settings on the page that asks you how to set up the SDK, whether to do it custom or go with the standard. Go with the standard most of the time. And cancel for now, and that's it. Our Android Studio is installed on Mac and it is ready to use to create new projects and open existing projects, including projects for Jetpack Compose.